Plato did not live to see the inauguration of his ideal state, nor to see the installation of a philosopher king who would know the good. But the legacy which Plato left is still very much with us, for better or for worse. The eminent British-American philosopher Alfred North Whitehead once said that the history of philosophy is merely a series of footnotes to Plato. Plato's influence is clearly seen in the thought of one of his best students, Aristotle, 384 to 322 BC. Aristotle, born in Stigria, spent 20 years at Plato's academy. Soon after the death of the master, Aristotle left the school because of disagreements with its new chiefs, and he founded an academy of his own, the Lyceum. In Aristotle's school, Platonic philosophy was taught, but it was also criticized. The main thrust of Aristotle's dispute with his mentor concerned the latter's otherworldliness. For Plato, there are two worlds, the unspeakably lofty world of forms and the world of mere things, which is but a poor imitation of the former. Aristotle contradicted this view, asserting that there is only one world and that we are right smack in the middle of it. In criticizing Plato, Aristotle asked, if forms are essences of things, how can they exist separated from things? If they are the cause of things, how can they exist in a different world? And a most telling criticism has to do with the problem of change and motion, which the early Greeks had tried to solve. There's the ideal dog, and then there are mere dog copies. This won't do. They thought that either stability was an illusion, the view of Herodotus, for example, or that motion was an illusion, the view of Parmenides. Plato had tried to resolve the dilemma by acknowledging the insights of both Heraclitus and Parmenides. The former's world is the unstable and transient realm of the visible. The latter's world is the immutable realm of the intelligible, composed of the eternally unchanging forms, which themselves are poorly reflected in the transitory world of the visible. But did Plato's compromise really solve the problem of motion and change? Is it really comprehensible to explain changing things by saying that they are bad imitations of unchanging things? Aristotle thought not. In offering his own solution to the problem, Aristotle employed some of the same terminology as Plato. He said that a distinction must be drawn between form and matter, but that these two features of reality can be distinguished only in thought, not in fact. Forms are not separate entities. They are embedded in particular things. They are in the world. To think otherwise is an intellectual confusion. A particular object, to count as an object at all, must have both form and matter. Form, as Plato had said, is universal, in the sense that many particulars can have the same form. Aristotle called an object's form its whatness. That is, when you say what something is, it's a tree, it's a book, you are naming its form. The form is a thing's essence or nature. It is related to the thing's function, a wheel, a knife, a brick, etc. An object's matter is what is unique to that object. Aristotle called it the object's thisness. All wheels or trees have the same form or function, but no two have the same matter. Matter is the principle of individuation. An object with both form and matter is what Aristotle called a substance. His anti-Platonic metaphysics holds that reality is composed of a plurality of substances. It is not composed of an upper tier of eternal forms and a lower tier of matter which unsuccessfully attempts to imitate those forms. This is Aristotle's pluralism as opposed to Plato's dualism, a dualism which verges on idealism, because for Plato the most real tier of reality is the non-material. How does Aristotle's pluralism solve the problem of motion and change, a problem which was unsuccessfully addressed by his predecessors? It does so by reinterpreting matter and form as potentiality and actuality. and turning these concepts into a theory of change. Any object in the world can be analyzed in terms of these categories. Aristotle's famous example is that of an acorn. The acorn's matter contains the potentiality of becoming an oak tree, which is the acorn's actuality. The acorn is the potentiality of there being an oak tree. The oak tree is the actuality of the acorn. So for Aristotle, form is an operating cause. Each individual substance is a self-contained teleological, i.e. goal-oriented system. In fact, Aristotle analyzed all substances in terms of four causes. The material cause is the stuff out of which something is made, e.g. a chunk of marble, which is to become a statue. The formal cause is the form, or essence of the statue, that which it strives to be. This exists both in the mind of the artist and potentially in the marble itself. The efficient cause is the actual force which brings about the change. The sculptor's chipping the block of stone. The final cause is the ultimate purpose of the object, the beautification of the Parthenon. Nature, then, is a teleological system in which each substance is striving for self-actualization and for whatever perfection is possible within the limitations allowed it by its particular essence. As in Plato's theory, everything is striving unconsciously toward the good. Aristotle believed that for such a system to work, some concrete perfection must actually exist as the telos, or goal, toward which all things are striving. This entity Aristotle called the prime mover. It serves as a kind of god in Aristotle's metaphysics, but unlike the traditional gods of Greece and unlike the god of Western religion, the prime mover is almost completely non-anthropomorphic. It is the cause of the universe, not in the Judeo-Christian sense of creating it out of nothing, but in the sense of a final cause. Everything moves toward it in the way a runner moves toward a goal. The prime mover is the only thing in the universe with no potentiality because being perfect, it cannot change. It is pure actuality, which is to say pure activity. What activity? The activity of pure thought. Then what does it think about? Perfection, that is to say about itself. The prime mover's knowledge is immediate, complete self-consciousness. What we seem to have here is an absolutely divine case of narcissism. Aristotle's moral philosophy, as it appears in his manuscript now called the Nicomachean Ethics, reflects his teleological metaphysics. The notion of goal or purpose is the overriding one in his moral theory. Aristotle noted that every act is performed for some purpose, which he defined as the good of that act. We perform an act because we find its purpose to be worthwhile. Either the totality of our acts is an infinitely circular series. We get up in order to eat breakfast. We eat breakfast in order to go to work. We go to work in order to get money. We get money so we can buy food in order to be able to eat breakfast, etc., etc., etc. In which case, life would be a pretty meaningless endeavor. Or there is some ultimate good toward which the purposes of all acts are directed. If there is such a good, we should try to come to know it so that we can adjust all our acts toward it in order to avoid that saddest of all tragedies, the wasted life. According to Aristotle, there is general verbal agreement that the end toward which all human acts are directed is happiness. And that therefore happiness is the human good, since we seek happiness for its own sake, not for the sake of something else. But unless we philosophize about happiness and get to know exactly what it is and how to achieve it, it will be platitudinous simply to say that happiness is the ultimate good. In order to determine the nature of happiness, Aristotle turned to his metaphysical schema and asked, what is the function of the human? In the same way, he would ask about the function of a knife or an acorn. He came to the conclusion that man's function is to engage in, quote, an activity of the soul which is in accordance with virtue, and which follows a rational principle, end of quote. Before grasping this complicated definition, we must determine what virtue is and what kinds of virtues there are. But first, as an aside, it must be mentioned that Aristotle believed that certain material conditions must hold before happiness can be achieved.